Hey everyone, welcome to Humanities 214, Art and Propaganda in the Modern World. Today I wanted to introduce to you the course themes and think about this in terms of inception and how inception is somewhat of a microcosm of what we're going to be studying this semester in terms of this class and what propaganda really is, right? Propaganda seeks to influence us either consciously or unconsciously to a certain end, to direct our behavior, to in some ways take some of our free agency or free will away from us to a certain extent and get us to think about something in a different way. And that sounds a little bit nefarious, and not all propaganda is evil or problematic, right? Sometimes propaganda can be really good and encourages us to do good things, but in some ways it's trying to encourage and to push us or compel us to a certain end. I think this quote is an important one at the top of the screen to think about in terms of this semester and what to get out of it. That true ignorance resides not in the lack of knowledge, but in being complacent with what you already know and not having a desire to learn more. And we're going to take a look at some pretty weighty issues this semester. We're going to take a look at some political ideas. We're going to take a look at some social ideas. And sometimes we're going to push against some of our false assumptions that we have. And this course is designed to get you to question our false understandings that have been influenced by our social environment, right? So we're getting to take a look at how propaganda influences us, and sometimes that can be a little bit uncomfortable for us as we start to cast away our old misunderstandings and seek to find newer ones that are better, more clear, getting us closer to truth. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to do, but remember that if we really want to understand right truth and the world around us and how ideas are influencing us, we have to not be complacent with what we already know. We have to have a desire to learn more and be okay with learning more. Let's take a look at Inception. A couple of questions that I want us to think about in terms of how this film relates to this class, because at first glance it probably doesn't really seem like there's a lot of overlap. How might Inception be a commentary on films? Not just this film, but all films, right? In other words, how do films make us so absorbed that it's difficult to decipher between reality and make-believe when watching them? So as you watch a film, are you so immersed that sometimes, you get a little bit, it gets a little bit murky about what's happening within what's fictional and what's real, right? When those jump scares happen in those scary movies, right? Why is it that we become so scared? And part of the reason is that we're immersed within the film, right? With this in mind, what do you think Inception is asserting about films, right? Can in films be this kind of mythical dream world where we're able to enter into to live out our hidden fantasies about saving the world or getting the girl or getting the guy or whatever the case may be? All right. Think about this in terms of the class itself as well. Every team member carries a totem that allows them to distinguish reality from dreams. How can we know that the world around us is real and not someone else's version of reality? And that's really getting to the heart of what propaganda is, right? Propaganda creates something that feels real, but it's not real, right? And it generally doesn't get us to question deeper questions about what is real and what is reality. So can we be living in someone else's constructed reality? Is a question I want us to think about this semester. Is there anything truly real, or is reality simply a construction of ideas that others impose onto us? Right? So thinking about how society might influence us, how politics might influence us, how our neighbors or our families might influence us, right? And then the third question to think about is, does Cobb's top fall at the end, right? Did he finally find a way to escape from this dream world, or is he still in it? And that's something to think about in terms of our own connection to propaganda. Are we able to ever really, truly escape from propaganda's influences, or is there always going to be more propaganda out there, right? Maybe as this course is taking a look at getting us to question propaganda, that is just another form of propaganda, right? So another thought to kind of think about. I know it's a little bit trippy. All right. I want us to think about this quote in connection to the course as well, and it's a connection to Inception. Most people don't know the answer to the question, how are you? How do you feel? The reason why they don't know the answer is that they are too busy feeling what they are supposed to feel, thinking what they're supposed to think, that they never get down to examining their own deepest feelings. With authority figures like teachers and professors telling us what to think and how to feel, many of us are busy playing roles, fulfilling other people's expectations. As Republicans, we think what other Republicans think. As Catholics, we think what other Catholics think. Or as members of the church, we think what other members of the church think, right? And so on. Not many of us ask ourselves, how do I feel? What do I think? And wait for the answer. And so this is something for us to think about, how ideas might influence us. How many of us are, taking classes on campus because we really are intending to get something out of it? How many of us are just maybe fulfilling a role? I mean, I know several people that have went on a mission, not because they necessarily wanted to, but because they felt pressured to do so, right? And that can happen in any number of things. It can happen within marriages. It can happen within, work environments. It can happen within colleges. So the idea is, how do we stop being acted upon and start acting for ourselves? And the idea of this action upon are these deep-seated ideas that society forces on us via propaganda, right? Something to perhaps think about. I wanted to apply inception and propaganda to the Book of Mormon to show you a couple of examples of how we might see a little aspect of this within there. The first one is with Benadi and King Noah from Mosiah chapter 17. And at this point, Benadi is teaching King Noah about the gospel, and King Noah is about ready to let him go, right? He's kind of felt guilty about not keeping the commandments and being a bad leader, that he's about ready to release Benadi, but then other people start to influence King Noah, right? And now King Noah was about to release him, for he feared his word, for he feared the judgments of God would come upon him. But the priests lifted up their voices against him. This is inception, right? Planting ideas in other people's heads, and began to accuse him, saying, "He has reviled the king." Therefore the king was stirred up in anger against him, and he delivered him up that he might be slain. And so here we see Noah, even King Noah, is being influenced by the voice of others, being influenced by society. And so we have to wonder how much society is actually influencing us. And we have to be aware of that if we're going to be able to move beyond it, right? Here's another example with Zarahemnah. Therefore Zarahemnah appointed chief captains over the Lamanites, and they were all Amalekites and Zoramites. Now this he did that he might preserve their hatred towards the Nephites. And so he's using them to use inception, right, to create this hatred towards the Nephites, that they might bring them into subjugation to the accomplishment of his designs. For behold, his designs were to stir up the Lamanites to anger against the Nephites. This he did that he might usurp great power over them, and also might gain power over the Nephites by bringing them into bondage. And so another aspect of inception, right, this idea of putting these ideas, propaganda, putting these ideas into the minds and hearts of people, is that it gets them to do what you want them to do. But in some way, is that not a form of bondage, right? We all want to be free thinkers. We all want to think for and act for ourselves, right? But if we're not really thinking past these social restrictions, we're not really thinking and acting for ourselves. We're really in bondage, so to speak. All right, thinking about examples of inception in terms of advertisement, I want you to think about if you can advertise or identify what is the logo that is being advertised, right? So with this one, what's the logo being advertised? And not only that, can you identify the slogan that goes with it, right? $137 billion are spent each year on advertising in the United States alone. And the question is, why is that? If advertisement didn't work, would these companies do it, right? Or this one, what's the company that's being advertised here? What's the logo? Or this one here. And by the way, I'm going to go through this one. This one's Amazon. Coke, if you didn't already get that one. This one's Apple. Gatorade. Chick-fil-A. And what's interesting about these logos is they don't necessarily, I mean, we can see them and we immediately recognize and identify that this just isn't a regular D. This is a Disney D. Or as we take a look at this one with this logo here, we always see our really, 6 yellow lines, and we know that it's Walmart. Or we see this symbol here, and we know that it's Starbucks. Or this, which is kind of like an M, right? We know that it's Monster, right? And the question I want us to consider is when we purchase items, are we solely thinking and acting for ourselves, or are we influenced by the image that the company wants to sell us, right? Are they selling us an image? Are they using that idea of inception, using propaganda to create an image, a brand for their company, that's what we're really buying? We're not really buying the Monster drink, or we're not really buying Disney, or we're not really buying, the Apple product per se. We're also buying the image that goes with it, right? So advertising is important, right? It's an important part of propaganda. Here's just some cost of advertising by top spenders, right? Number 9, Disney spends $2.1 billion a year creating their brand, right? Creating their image. L'Oreal and Fiat are tied at number 8 at $2.2 billion. American Express spends $2.4 billion selling its brand. Coke, Ford, and Verizon are all tied for 5th at $2.5 billion. Comcast it spends $3 billion a year. GM, $3.1 billion a year. AT&T spends $3.3 billion. And then the number one spender is Procter & Gamble, which is a parent company for a lot of different things. Almost all the things that you buy at the supermarket is going to be in some way owned by Procter & Gamble, particularly the health and beauty section is going to be produced by Procter & Gamble. They spend $4.6 billion a year total with all of their subsidiary companies together, right? So again, they feel that they can influence people. They want to sell their brand. They want to create an image that people want to buy into. So they're not just buying the products, right? The products, in a sense, could sell themselves, right? But what they're trying to do is they're trying to get you to buy their brand and not someone else's because of the image that corresponds with it, right? But again, I mean, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time this semester on marketing and advertising. It's just a small part of propaganda. What we're mainly spend time with is how governments use propaganda in order to create an idea, or how society uses propaganda in order to create images or a sense of identity within groups, right? This idea of tribalism that we've discussed before. Now, let's take a look at inception and our expectations of the college classroom experience. This quote here comes from a law professor, and he takes a look out as a law professor in this room that's filled with people. These college students, they're all first-year students, and he writes what he sees. And I want you to think about what he sees within these students, and whether you know people like these students, whether you are one of these students, why these students respond the way they do. Because it's not all bad, but it's not all good either, right? So what can we learn from them, and what can we try to avoid, right? And how is it that inception, right, this idea of what our expectations of school are, how that might influence us on what we expect to get out of it, right? He says the auditorium is crowded. It's the beginning of classes in the first year of law school. The students are there, a little slow to get started, but determined to take notes, to underline, to darken page after page. There's no ambiance of disorder, no spirit of rebellion. These students of the new century are light years from the earlier generations, right? So that's a positive, right? You guys are much more advanced than before. They are without political passions. They accommodate themselves to the rules of the game that are imposed on them. So again, that there's some problems with that, but also there's some positives with that as well. They are well behaved, which is awesome, and they are nice. By all appearances, these are peaceful times for professors. And he's juxtaposing this with students from the 1960s who are much more rebellious on college campuses, and we'll take a look a little bit about that towards the later part of the semester. But students today are very peaceful and very nice when they come to classes, and so that's some positives. He says, however, there's some problems here as well. He says, and yet I sense a distinct sullenness in the atmosphere. These students are there under orders. They take down the words, but they're not excited by the subjects they are studying. They lend part of themselves because they feel obligated to do so, but in their deeper selves, they are absent. At the slightest digression, their attention is immediately elsewhere, right? They take out their cell phones and they're doing something else. They're gone. As soon as the students have the feeling that I'm departing from the specific framework in the class, and thus what relates to the examination, I lose them. They're gone, right? So the students are there mainly to test and to get done. If I should happen to interrupt the regular flow of a lecture by expressing interest in a certain book, I sense in their attitude a latent indifference. And so what we really see within this college classroom, right? They're there, which is great. They're taking notes, which is great, right? They're following the rules, which is awesome. But they're not passionate. They're not really interested in being there, right? They feel like that they're under orders, they're under duress. And so the inception here that society imposes upon us is that you have to go to college to get a degree, otherwise you're going to be a wasted form of life, right? Which isn't true. So people generally can come to college feeling that they just need to get a degree so they can move on and get on with their life and get a job, right? But maybe there might be more to college than just getting a degree. Maybe there could be something to learn and to gain as a person, right? So hopefully this doesn't describe you in your entirety. Maybe it describes you in some ways, and maybe it doesn't in other ways. But just think about this in terms of what can I do to improve? How can I be more passionate? Even in classes that I might not necessarily be that interested in because I feel like I have to take it, I'm forced to take it due to my course requirements. What can I learn? How can I be a better person as a result? These are questions to think about. With this, let's take a look at Ophelia syndrome, right? If you were to think about your education in your own words, what metaphor would you use to describe your college experience, right? Would you think of yourself as standing in front of an oncoming bus, a dog jumping through hoops, a mouse in a maze, a kid in a candy store? What would be, don't use those metaphors, come up with your own metaphor. What would be your metaphor to describe your college experience? And that's really going to give you some more insights into what your attitude is towards college, towards education, towards your classes in general, right? And then once you know what your attitude is, then you can start really thinking about that and thinking about why it comes from there, right? Where is this stemming from? What's the deeper concern that I have about this? Or what is it that I really want to get out of this? And then you can have a more of a clearer view of what you want to get, where you want to go with your education, and so you can stop being acted upon and start acting, right? What does Plummer in the diagnosing and treating the Ophelia syndrome suggest that we can do to view education differently, right? So that's one thing I want you to get out of that reading. In other words, how can you avoid becoming like Ophelia? And he gives you a list of things that you can consider, things that you can do, so that you can avoid just being like Ophelia and just coming to class and thinking that the professor is going to tell you exactly what to do, or that you're just this force to be acted upon in your college classes, but you can actually take ownership. Even though you might not necessarily be able to determine what courses you have to take due to course requirements, you can still be an actor within your classes, right? Taking control, taking power of your education and what to expect out of it. With that in mind, I wanted to show you a quick film it really comes from a commencement speech that David Foster Wallace gave at Kenyon College a few years ago, and then someone made it into a film. It's called This Is Water, and it gets us to really think about not just education, but life. It gets us to think about how we might be influenced by these inception ideas, or this propaganda of just kind of going through the day-to-day, and to really start thinking about it differently. And he uses a metaphor of goldfish at the beginning, and he calls this commencement speech, "This is water," and you'll find out why.
There are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" The point of the fish story is merely that the most obvious, important realities are often the ones that are hardest to see and talk about. Stated as an English sentence, of course, this is just a banal platitude. But the fact is that in the day-to-day trenches of adult existence, banal platitudes can have a life or death importance. The plain fact is that you graduating seniors do not yet have any clue what day in, day out really means. There happen to be whole, large parts of adult American life that nobody talks about in commencement speeches. One such part involves boredom, routine, and petty frustration. The parents and older folks here will know all too well what I'm talking about. By way of example, let's say it's an average adult day, and you get up in the morning, go to your challenging white-collar college graduate job, and you work hard for 8 or 10 hours, and at the end of the day you're tired and somewhat stressed, and all you want is to go home and have a good supper and maybe unwind for an hour and then hit the sack early, because of course you have to get up the next day and do it all again. But then you remember there's no food at home. You haven't had time to shop this week because of your challenging job. And so now, after work, you have to get in your car and drive to the supermarket. It's the end of a work day, and the traffic is apt to be very bad. So getting to the store takes way longer than it should. And when you finally get there, the supermarket is very crowded, because of course it's the time of day when all the other people with jobs also try to squeeze in some grocery shopping. But you can't just get in and quickly out. You have to wander all over the huge, overlit store's confusing aisles to find the stuff you want, and you have to maneuver your junky cart through all these other tired, hurried people with carts, et cetera, cutting stuff out because it's a long ceremony. And eventually, you get all your supper supplies, except now it turns out there aren't enough checkout lanes open, even though it's the end of the day rush. So the checkout line is incredibly long, which is stupid and infuriating, but you can't take your frustration out on the frantic lady working the register, who is overworked at a job whose daily tedium and meaninglessness surpasses the imagination of any of us here at a prestigious college. But anyway, you finally get to the checkout line's front, and you pay for your food and get told to have a nice day in a voice that is the absolute voice of death. And then you have to take your creepy, flimsy plastic bags of groceries in your cart with the one crazy wheel that pulls maddeningly to the left, all the way out through the crowded, bumpy, littery parking lot, and then you have to drive all the way home through slow, heavy, SUV-intensive rush hour traffic, etc., etc. Everyone here has done this, of course, but it hasn't yet been part of you graduates' actual life routine, day after week, after month, after year. But it will be. And many more dreary, annoying, seemingly meaningless routines besides. But that is not the point. The point is that petty, frustrating crap like this is exactly where the work of choosing is going to come in. Because the traffic jams and crowded aisles and long checkout lines give me time to think. And if I don't make a conscious decision about how to think and what to pay attention to, I'm going to be pissed and miserable every time I have to shop. Because my natural default setting is the certainty that situations like this are really all about me. About my hungriness and my fatigue and my desire to just get home. And it's going to seem for all the world like everybody else is just in my way. And who are all these people in my way? And look at how repulsive most of them are, and how stupid and cow-like and dead-eyed and non-human they seem in the checkout line. Or at how annoying and rude it is that people are talking loudly on cell phones in the middle of the line. And look at how deeply, personally unfair this is. If I choose to think this way in the store and on the freeway, fine. Lots of us do. Except thinking this way tends to be so easy and automatic that it doesn't have to be a choice. It is my natural default setting. It's the automatic way that I experience the boring, frustrating, crowded parts of adult life when I'm operating on the automatic, unconscious belief that I am the center of the world and that my immediate needs and feelings are what should determine the world's priorities. The thing is that, of course, there are totally different ways to think about these kinds of situations. In this traffic, all these vehicles stuck and idling in my way, it's not impossible that some of these people in SUVs have been in horrible auto accidents in the past and now find driving so terrifying that their therapist has all but ordered them to get a huge, heavy SUV so they can feel safe enough to drive. Or I can choose to force myself to consider the likelihood that everyone else in the supermarket's checkout line is just as bored and frustrated as I am, and that some of these people probably have much harder, more tedious or painful lives than I do. Again, please don't think I'm giving you moral advice, or that I'm saying you're supposed to think this way, or that anyone expects you to just automatically do it, because it's hard. It takes will and effort, and if you are like me, some days you won't be able to do it, or you just flat out won't want to. But most days, if you're aware enough to give yourself a choice, you can choose to look differently at this fat, dead-eyed, over-made-up lady who just screamed at her kid in the checkout line. Maybe she's not usually like this. Maybe she's been up 3 straight nights holding the hand of her husband who's dying of bone cancer. Or maybe this very lady is the low-wage clerk at the motor vehicles department who just yesterday helped your spouse resolve a horrific, infuriating red tape problem through some small act of bureaucratic kindness. Of course, none of this is likely, but it's also not impossible. It just depends what you want to consider. If you're automatically sure that you know what reality is and who and what is really important, if you want to operate on your default setting, then you, like me, probably won't consider possibilities that aren't annoying and miserable. But if you really learn how to think, how to pay attention, then you will know you have other options. It will actually be within your power to experience a crowded, hot, slow, consumer hell-type situation as not only meaningful, but sacred, on fire with the same force that lit the stars. Love, fellowship, the mystical oneness of all things deep down. Not that that mystical stuff's necessarily true. The only thing that's capital T true is that you get to decide how you're going to try to see it. This, I submit, is the freedom of real education, of learning how to be well-adjusted. You get to consciously decide what has meaning and what doesn't. That is real freedom. That is being educated and understanding how to think. The alternative is unconsciousness, the default setting, the rat race, the constant gnawing sense of having had and lost some infinite thing. I know that this stuff probably doesn't sound fun and breezy or grandly inspirational the way a commencement speech is supposed to sound. What it is, as far as I can see, is the capital T truth with a whole lot of rhetorical niceties stripped away. You are, of course, free to think of it whatever you wish. But please don't just dismiss it as some finger-wagging Dr. Laura sermon. None of this stuff is really about morality or religion or dogma or big fancy questions of life after death. The capital T truth is about life before death. It is about the real value of a real education, which has almost nothing to do with knowledge and everything to do with simple awareness. Awareness of what is so real and essential, so hidden in plain sight all around us all the time, that we have to keep reminding ourselves over and over, this is water. This is water.
Okay, there's lots of thoughts that I have within that, right? One of them is this idea of how we become just kind of passive in our lives, that we're not really thinking about taking action. We just have this kind of, he says it, the default, just kind of the rat race of just trying to survive. And my question is, do we really want to just survive, or do we truly want to live, right? Do we truly want to appreciate life and to take responsibility for the choices that we make and the actions, and to make the most out of it? And I like what he said at the very end, that true education is about awareness of the life around us, awareness for what life is and the true meaning of life, right? And how to make the most out of it. It's not just about getting a degree and getting a job when you're done. Although those things are important, I'm not suggesting that they're not. But there might be more to life than that, right? And the idea that we need to perhaps push past these social influences that get us to just not really think about life in a deeper way, right? To just kind of push us into certain ways of what we're supposed to do, or supposed to think, or supposed to behave, rather than thinking and acting for ourselves, right? Here's a couple questions to reflect on. Would you rather your college classes focus on teaching you what to think or how to think? Which approach better teaches students to act for themselves, right? So as you think about what you want to get out of your education, how to move past the Ophelia syndrome, and how to move past this idea of being influenced by others, or inception, right? which one would be a better approach? What to expect out of it, right? Here's a couple quotes to think about. I like this one from Martin Luther King. He said, "The function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character, the goal of a true education." I think this picks up on what David Foster Wallace is saying about what education is. This is another way of saying that education is awareness, right? Awareness of what makes a great character, what makes true education, right? That to be able to think critically for ourselves rather than being influenced by others. Here's what Buddha says about it: the mind is everything. What you think, you become. And if you're not thinking, what does that say about you? Are you becoming a zombie, right? I want to avoid having zombies on campus, right? We all want to be able to think and act for ourselves and to push past it. I'll leave you with this one. President Nelson said, "Wherever you are, develop a deep desire to learn." For us as Latter-day Saints, gaining an education is not just a privilege, it's a religious responsibility. And so, again, just getting you to think a little bit about life, a little bit about education, thinking about what you're supposed to do with learning, and how to begin to try to see life a little bit differently than what society tells us, to push past those inception ideas and to start really becoming an actor for ourselves. But part of it is going to take, as President Nelson says here, a deep desire within us, right? That's something that your teachers cannot instill within you. They can instill a desire, right? As you think about some of you that have served missions, the differences between the friends that you were teaching that just were kind of apathetic and uninterested versus those that are on fire. The real difference is that they had a desire to learn, right? As you think about your classes, do you have a desire? Because that's something that a teacher cannot ignite, right? A teacher can help inspire, a teacher can help organize or provide opportunities and invite, but that desire has to be self-driven, right? So that's something to perhaps think about a little bit more over the next week, right? Is that desire to continue to learn, to grow, to develop, and how to become an actor within your life.